The battle in West Virginia, American labor would again suffer a major defeat, this time in San Pedro, California. Longshoremen were upset, both by low wages and attempts to criminalize union organizing under the Criminal Syndicalism Act, a relic of the Red Scare. On April 25, 1923, several thousand dock workers walked off the job. Huge sympathy walkouts also occurred on the East Coast. After 100 ships were tied up in the port of Los Angeles, police moved in to round up union leaders. At that point, the industrial workers of the world called for a citywide strike. The industrial workers of the world, also known as the Wobblies, were one of the few unions from the time period that rejected divisions based on race, sex, and skill. Embracing a nonviolent but revolutionary strategy known as anarcho-syndicalism, they had come under repeated attacks by authorities from the time of their founding in 1905. During World War I and the Red Scare, their offices were raided, and some of their members given prison sentences of up to 20 years. Several Wobblies, such as Frank Little, were lynched by vigilantes. The Wobblies never recovered from these assaults. By the 1920s, many of their most effective organizers were either dead, deported, or languishing in prison, and their numbers had begun to decline. In San Pedro, they not only had to fight the police, but the Ku Klux Klan.
The Ku Klux Klan was reinvented by the federal government, literally, by Woodrow Wilson. It had come out of after the Civil War as a fascist, reactionary, terrorist group to create Jim Crow, and it was successful at that. And then all of the offices, every local office, the governorship, senators, and congressmen, they were all Jim Crow, segregationists. So they didn't need the Klan anymore. You can really trace the reinvention with the Birth of a Nation, which was, first of all, a novel by a segregationist, and then it was made into a blockbuster silent movie in the early days of silent movies, Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith. These people, both the author of the book and the filmmaker, were good friends of Woodrow Wilson, who was a segregationist. And that movie was premiered in the White House. And it was lines around the block in every town and city in the country of people seeing that movie. It's a racial hatred movie that depicts the righteousness of the Ku Klux Klan. It's about the early Klan. So this, took off. People started forming clans. The Klan was literally recreated. From my work in Central America in the 1980s and the formation of death squads in El Salvador and Guatemala, I looked at that and I said, that's the purpose the Klan served. It was a parallel institution of the police. In Central America, they wore masks. But they were often just army people, doing this at night and with a full green light from the authorities.
Only 1 year before the strike in San Pedro, Los Angeles District Attorney Thomas Lee Woolwine raided Klan headquarters and seized their records. He was shocked to discover that the head of the LAPD, Louis D. Oakes, was himself a member. It was a nationwide problem. The Portland Telegram reported that the police bureau was full to the brink with Klansmen, while in Colorado, KKK members included several state senators, the Secretary of State, 4 judges, and scores of police. In San Pedro, members of the Klan arrived in gangs to intimidate strikers on the docks, both with and without their hoods. In response, workers began to assemble on a parcel of land overlooking the harbor. They named it Liberty Hill. One frequent speaker was the Los Angeles-based writer and socialist Upton Sinclair, author of the 1906 novel, The Jungle. The book's vivid exposés of the brutal working conditions and unhygienic practices in American meat plants had led to reforms in the industry. On May 15th, on Liberty Hill, Sinclair read the First Amendment to the American Constitution. Before he could finish, he was arrested by the LAPD. 3 days later, 71 Wobblies were arrested and jailed, while 500 scabs were granted full employment on the docks. The strike had been defeated. The Wobblies continued to agitate in San Pedro, and the Klan continued to assault them. In 1924, the Union held a benefit for workers who had died in a railroad accident. Masked Klansmen burst into the meeting hall and assaulted men, women, and children. 2 children, Andrew Kruglis and May Sunstead, were severely burned when the attackers threw boiling water at them from a coffee pot. Sunstead's mother, a poor washerwoman named Lisa, died from injuries sustained during the assault. The 1923 San Pedro strike is recognized by labor historians as the biggest challenge to anti-unionism in Los Angeles prior to the 1930s. However, its failure also signified the decline of the Wobblies, as well as the broader anarchist movement in the United States.